Imagine waking up tomorrow as the person you've always wanted to become. You wake before your alarm without forcing yourself out of bed. You begin the day with purpose instead of hesitation. You exercise because it feels natural. You focus deeply on your work instead of reaching for distractions. You keep promises to yourself without needing endless motivation. At the end of the day, you don't feel guilty about what you didn't do. Instead, you quietly smile, knowing you became just a little better than yesterday. Now imagine discovering that this version of yourself has been living inside you all along, not hidden by a lack of talent, not held back by bad luck, not waiting for some perfect opportunity, but buried beneath patterns your brain has repeated for years. Most people believe success begins with a decision. Tomorrow I'll change. This time I'll stay disciplined. This is my fresh start. For a few days, everything feels different. Motivation is high. Energy is endless. The future seems exciting. Then something familiar happens. One missed workout becomes 3. One late night becomes another. One distraction turns into an afternoon lost scrolling through your phone. Within weeks, the excitement fades, and life quietly returns to exactly where it was before. If this has ever happened to you, you are not alone. In fact, you are experiencing one of the most misunderstood truths about the human mind. The greatest obstacle to success isn't a lack of motivation. It's that your brain loves familiarity more than improvement. That may sound discouraging at first, but hidden within that truth is one of the most hopeful discoveries in modern psychology. Because if your brain can learn patterns that keep you stuck, it can also learn patterns that set you free. There is an old story about a stonecutter who spent every day striking a massive rock with his hammer. The first blow left no visible mark. Neither did the second, or the 100th. People walking past laughed at his effort. "It isn't working," they said. But the stonecutter continued. Then, after countless strikes, the rock suddenly split in two. To anyone watching, it looked as though the final strike caused the breakthrough. But the stonecutter understood something they did not. The rock did not break because of the last swing. It broke because of every swing that came before it. Success often works the same way. We celebrate visible results. We admire the entrepreneur who built a thriving company, the athlete who wins a championship, the musician who fills concert halls, the author whose book changes millions of lives. Yet we rarely see the invisible repetitions that made those achievements possible. Thousands of quiet mornings, thousands of ordinary decisions, thousands of moments when no one was watching. The world celebrates outcomes. The brain is shaped by repetition. This is the first lesson of lasting change. Your life is not determined by the biggest decision you make. It is determined by the smallest decision you repeat. Think about a river flowing through a mountain. Water is soft, stone is hard, yet over time the river reshapes the mountain, not because the water is stronger, but because it never stops flowing in the same direction. Your brain behaves in exactly the same way. Every repeated thought carves a pathway. Every repeated action deepens it. Every repeated emotion strengthens it. Over time, those pathways become the routes your mind prefers to travel. That is why your habits begin to feel automatic, not because they were chosen once, but because they were chosen repeatedly. Here is something remarkable. Every skill reshapes neural connections. Every repeated behavior strengthens certain pathways while allowing others to fade. This ability is known as neuroplasticity. The word may sound complicated. The idea is beautifully simple. Your brain becomes better at whatever it practices. Read that sentence again in your mind. Your brain becomes better at whatever it practices, not whatever it wishes for, not whatever it plans, not whatever it dreams about late at night. Whatever it practices. Practice worry, and worrying becomes easier. Practice procrastination, and hesitation becomes familiar. Practice confidence, and confidence begins to feel natural. Practice courage, and fear slowly loses its authority. Your brain does not judge your habits. It simply reinforces them. Imagine walking through a forest where no path exists. The first journey is difficult. Branches block your way. Tall grass slows every step. You must consciously decide where to place each foot. But return tomorrow, and the journey feels slightly easier. Walk the same route for weeks, and a narrow trail begins to appear. Walk it for years, and eventually the path becomes so familiar that you can follow it without thinking. Habits are mental trails. The more often you travel them, the easier they become to follow. Now consider something else. Every morning, before your conscious mind is fully awake, your brain begins following those familiar paths. You brush your teeth without thinking. You check your phone without deciding. You pour your coffee almost automatically. Some researchers estimate that a large portion of our daily behavior happens with remarkably little conscious effort. That realization can feel unsettling, but it should also feel empowering. Because if much of your life is shaped by automatic patterns, then changing those patterns changes your life. The problem is that most people try to change their future without changing their systems. They rely on motivation. They wait until they feel ready. They believe inspiration will carry them across the finish line. But motivation is like the weather. Some days it arrives bright and full of energy. Other days it disappears without warning. If your success depends on always feeling motivated, your progress will always rise and fall with your emotions. The people who create extraordinary lives understand something different. They do not build their future on motivation. They build it on repetition, because repetition is what teaches the brain, and the brain eventually turns repetition into identity. This brings us to a question that quietly changes everything. What if success isn't something you achieve? What if success is simply the natural result of becoming the kind of person who repeatedly does successful things? That question may be the beginning of an entirely new way of thinking, because the life you want is not waiting for one extraordinary decision. It is waiting for thousands of ordinary ones. And in the next chapter, we'll explore why motivation fades so quickly, why willpower is often misunderstood, and how your identity, not your goals, ultimately determines the future you create. There is a question worth asking before you try to change your life. If human beings naturally want better health, stronger relationships, financial freedom, and meaningful work, why do we so often repeat the behaviors that move us in the opposite direction? The answer isn't that we are lazy, nor is it that we lack intelligence. The answer lies in the way the brain was designed long before modern life existed. Imagine standing at the edge of a forest thousands of years ago. Every sound in the distance could signal danger. Every unfamiliar path carried uncertainty. Every decision had consequences for survival. In that world, the brain developed one overriding priority: not success, not happiness, survival. And survival favors what is familiar. The familiar path may not be the best path, but it is the path the brain already understands. That ancient wiring still lives inside us today. It explains why we often return to routines that no longer serve us. It explains why change feels uncomfortable, even when we know it is good for us. And it explains why the first steps toward a better life often feel harder than staying exactly where we are. Your brain isn't trying to ruin your future. It is trying to protect you from uncertainty. Unfortunately, growth and uncertainty have always traveled together. Every promotion begins with responsibilities you've never carried before. Every meaningful relationship requires vulnerability. Every new business begins with unanswered questions. Every important dream asks you to step beyond what feels comfortable. This is why comfort can become such a convincing illusion. Comfort whispers, "Stay where you are. At least you know what to expect." Growth whispers something different. You cannot become someone new by repeating yesterday. Most people spend their lives listening to the louder voice. There is a story about a young sailor learning to navigate the open sea. Whenever a storm appeared, he steered the boat back toward the shoreline. His instructor watched patiently before asking a simple question. "Why did you turn back?" "Because it felt safer," the young man replied. The instructor smiled. "The harbor is the safest place for a ship. He paused before adding, "But ships were never built to stay in the harbor. Many of us live exactly that way. We protect ourselves from failure by avoiding opportunities. We protect ourselves from rejection by remaining silent. We protect ourselves from disappointment by refusing to try. In doing so, we also protect ourselves from growth. Safety becomes a prison with invisible walls. This is where another misunderstanding begins. People often believe confidence comes first. They imagine that successful people take action because they already feel certain. But psychology suggests the opposite. Confidence is usually the result of repeated action, not the requirement for it. Think back to the first time you learned to ride a bicycle. You didn't feel confident. You felt uncertain. You wobbled. You lost balance. Perhaps you even fell. Yet each attempt taught your brain something new. Gradually, movements that once demanded complete concentration became automatic. Not because fear disappeared overnight, but because repetition rewired your brain. The same process shapes nearly every skill in life: public speaking, leadership, writing, discipline, resilience. They begin as uncomfortable actions. Over time, they become familiar patterns, and eventually they become part of your identity. This is why relying on motivation is so unreliable. Motivation is emotional. Identity is neurological. One changes with your mood, the other changes with repetition. That distinction changes everything. When someone says, "I'm trying to become disciplined," they often focus on forcing themselves to work harder. But a more useful question is, what kind of person keeps this promise to themselves? The brain responds differently to identity than it does to goals. Goals focus on outcomes. Identity focuses on becoming. One says, "I want to run a marathon." The other says, "I am someone who trains consistently." One depends on reaching the finish line. The other transforms every training session into proof of who you are becoming. That is why lasting change begins long before visible success arrives. Every repeated action becomes evidence. Every kept promise strengthens belief. Every small victory quietly reshapes identity. Little by little, the impossible begins to feel normal. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of personal transformation. You do not wake up one morning as a completely different person. You become different through hundreds of ordinary moments that nobody else notices. The decision to read one more page, the choice to take one more walk, the courage to begin before you feel ready. Each action is small, but together they become the architecture of a new mind. Because your future is never built in a single extraordinary moment. It is built through the quiet repetition of ordinary days. And once you understand that, you stop searching for the perfect moment to begin. You simply begin. There is a quiet conversation taking place inside your mind every single day. Most of the time, you never notice it. It doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't demand your attention. Instead, it whispers, "I'm just not disciplined. I've always been this way. Other people are naturally confident. I never finish what I start." The strange thing about these thoughts is that they rarely arrive as opinions. They arrive as facts. And when the brain accepts a story as truth, it begins searching for evidence to prove that story right. Imagine wearing a pair of glasses with a faint blue tint. After wearing them long enough, you stop noticing the color. The world simply appears blue. Your beliefs work in much the same way. They quietly filter every experience before you are even aware of it. If you believe you are someone who always procrastinates, every delayed task becomes proof. If you believe you lack confidence, every awkward conversation confirms it. The mind becomes both the storyteller and the audience. There is an old legend about two wolves living inside every person. One represents fear, doubt, resentment, and comfort. The other represents courage, curiosity, patience, and growth. A young student once asked an elder, "Which wolf wins?" The elder smiled. "The one you feed." Whether the story is ancient or symbolic, the lesson remains timeless. Attention strengthens whatever it repeatedly returns to. Your brain is always listening to the words you repeat about yourself. Not because words are magical, but because repeated thoughts slowly become expectations, and expectations shape behavior. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a self-fulfilling pattern. When you expect failure, you often hesitate. That hesitation changes your actions. Those actions produce weaker results. The weaker results then appear to confirm the original belief. The cycle continues not because the belief was true, but because it quietly shaped every decision that followed. The opposite is equally powerful. A person who believes they are becoming healthier notices opportunities to move more. Someone who believes they are becoming disciplined keeps promises they once ignored. Someone who believes they are becoming confident speaks a little sooner, stands a little taller, and worries a little less about making mistakes. Notice the difference. Not perfect, becoming. That single word changes everything. Growth is never an identity you suddenly possess. It is an identity you gradually earn through repetition. There is a story about a young artist who visited a famous painter's studio. The walls were covered with extraordinary masterpieces. The visitor stood in silence before asking, "How do you create work this beautiful?" The painter led him into another room. Unlike the gallery, this room was filled with unfinished sketches, failed paintings, torn canvases, and discarded ideas. The young artist looked confused. "I thought great artists created great work." The painter smiled. "No." He picked up one of the rough sketches. "Great artists create thousands of imperfect attempts." He paused before adding, "People admire the paintings. They rarely see the practice. Success has always hidden its repetitions. We compare our beginnings to someone else's mastery. We compare our first chapter to someone else's final draft. We compare today's effort with years of invisible work we never witnessed. Comparison quietly steals momentum because it shifts your attention away from the only person you are capable of becoming, yesterday's version of yourself. Real growth is rarely dramatic. It often looks almost disappointingly ordinary. Reading 10 pages instead of none, taking a short walk instead of staying on the couch, writing one paragraph instead of waiting for inspiration, choosing patience instead of reacting. The actions seem insignificant, but your brain isn't measuring their size. It is measuring their consistency. Every repeated action sends a message. This is who we are. Over time, identity becomes less about what you say and more about what you repeatedly do. Perhaps this is why lasting change feels so different from temporary motivation. Motivation tells you to chase a result. Identity asks you to become someone who naturally creates that result. One depends on emotion, the other depends on evidence. And every small promise you keep becomes another piece of evidence, not for the world, for yourself. Because the person you speak to more than anyone else is the person living inside your own mind. Choose those words carefully. They are quietly becoming your future. Your future is created by the patterns you repeat, not the promises you make. In the final chapter, we'll bring everything together and discover how a few small daily patterns can reshape not only your habits, but the direction of your entire life, revealing why transformation is never the result of one extraordinary decision, but of thousands of ordinary ones made with intention. There is one final misunderstanding about change that keeps countless people trapped. We imagine transformation as a single defining moment, a breakthrough, a life-changing decision, a dramatic turning point where everything suddenly becomes different. Those moments certainly exist, but they are rarely where lasting change begins. Real transformation is much quieter. It happens in ordinary mornings, in small decisions, in choices so insignificant that most people overlook them completely. Imagine watching a master craftsman build a cathedral. On the first day, you see only a single stone being placed. On the second day, another. Weeks pass, and the structure barely seems to change. A stranger walking by might wonder if any progress is being made at all. But the craftsman understands something the stranger cannot yet see. Every stone supports the next. Every careful measurement prevents future collapse. Every patient decision contributes to a masterpiece that cannot yet be imagined. Your future is built in exactly the same way. Every habit is another stone. Every promise you keep is another brick. Every difficult decision strengthens the foundation beneath the life you are creating. The world celebrates dramatic success because it is easy to see. The world rarely notices the quiet discipline that made it possible. There is a Japanese expression that describes the philosophy of continuous improvement. Kaizen. This meaning is beautifully simple. Small improvements, made consistently, day after day. Most people underestimate what small actions can accomplish because they judge them in isolation. Reading 10 pages doesn't seem life-changing. Taking a 15-minute walk feels insignificant. Saving a small amount of money appears almost meaningless. Practicing a skill for 20 minutes hardly feels extraordinary. Yet the brain never evaluates a habit as an isolated event. It evaluates patterns. The greatest mistake we make is believing today's action is only about today. It never is. Today's action is teaching tomorrow's brain what to expect. Every repeated choice is writing instructions into your nervous system. This is why discipline becomes easier. This is why confidence grows. This is why habits eventually feel effortless. Not because life became simpler, but because your brain became more efficient at becoming the person you repeatedly practice being. There is a story about a gardener who planted bamboo. For the first year, almost nothing appeared above the soil. The second year looked much the same. The third year brought little visible change. Many people would have assumed the seeds had failed. But beneath the surface, an extraordinary root system was quietly expanding. Then, within a remarkably short period of time, the bamboo began rising rapidly toward the sky. People admired the sudden growth. The gardener smiled. It wasn't sudden. It was growing all along. Human transformation often follows the same rhythm. For weeks, perhaps months, your efforts may seem invisible. You continue reading. You continue learning. You continue exercising. You continue keeping promises to yourself. Nothing appears dramatically different. Then one day you respond calmly in a situation that once overwhelmed you. You finish a project you would have abandoned months earlier. You make a decision with confidence instead of fear. You realize you have become someone your past self would hardly recognize. The change did not happen overnight. It happened beneath the surface, quietly, patiently, one repeated action at a time. This is why comparing your progress to someone else's is so dangerous. You cannot see their roots. You only see their results. You cannot measure your journey against a chapter of someone else's story when you have not read the pages that came before it. The only comparison that truly matters is between who you are today and who you were yesterday. If today's version of you is just 1% wiser, 1% calmer, 1% more disciplined, then you are already moving in the right direction. That is how extraordinary lives are built. Not through perfection, through direction. Your future is created by the patterns you repeat, not the promises you make. If there is one idea worth carrying with you after this audiobook, let it be that. Because every morning presents a quiet choice, to repeat yesterday, or to reinforce the person you hope to become. No audience will applaud those moments. No headline will celebrate them. No one may even notice them. But your brain notices, every single time. It is always learning, always adapting, always becoming, and that should fill you with hope, because it means your past does not have to become your future. The habits that once held you back can be replaced. The beliefs that once limited you can be rewritten. The entity that once felt permanent can evolve, not through one extraordinary decision, but through thousands of ordinary ones. Years from now, people may look at your confidence, your discipline, your success, or your peace of mind and wonder how you changed your life. They may search for a secret, a shortcut, a single breakthrough, but you will know the truth. Your life changed the moment you stopped chasing motivation and started building patterns, because motivation fades, willpower fluctuates, circumstances change, but patterns become character, and character shapes destiny. So tomorrow morning, when the day begins, don't ask yourself whether you feel motivated. Ask a different question. What would the person I am becoming do next? Then do only that, not everything, just the next right thing, and then repeat it again tomorrow, because every repetition is another vote for your future. Every small decision is another line in the story of your life, and every chapter you write today determines the story you'll one day be proud to tell. In our next audiobook, we'll explore Build Discipline That Lasts Forever, where you'll discover why discipline isn't about forcing yourself to work harder. It's about designing a life where the right choices become the easiest choices. Because once your brain has been rewired for change, the next step is learning how to make that change permanent. Until then, remember this: your future is never created in a single moment. It is created in the patterns you choose to repeat every day.